Welcome, friends. Welcome to a special edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc, and here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. I'm excited about today's show. As some of you know who are listening or watching for a while, about maybe 15% of the shows are where we turn the tables and someone interviews me about something that is important for me to be sharing about. And today's one of those shows. And my dear friend Kathy Bibby is going to be interviewing me, but I want to set the stage a little bit. So for the last several months, I've been hearing about and beginning to listen to and watch a man named Jordan Peterson. And I don't know a lot about his background, but I think he's a clinical psychologist, I think from maybe Canada. And somehow he's become popular, especially among the, I would say, the right, over the last couple of years. And I've listened to him and watched him and found him to be an intriguing character. And more specifically, I noticed that I had a strong reaction to him, mixed feelings. There were things I really liked about who he was and what he was saying, and certain things that rubbed me the wrong way at a really deep level, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew the inquiry I was involved in to get clear myself was important, because I knew that whatever I would be discovering would be something that would be powerful for myself and probably for other people. And then a few days ago, I was watching an extended interview between where Jordan Peterson was being interviewed by Dennis Prager as part of his PragerU Summit. And about halfway into the interview, I had like a revelation where I got what worked for me and what didn't work for me about what he was doing and being and saying. And I think because a lot of what he's saying is really valid, there's a big danger of especially young people just buying his whole trip, hook, line, and sinker. And I see some problems with that. And so, as is my preference, rather than just give a lecture, I prefer to be in conversation, powerful conversations with people, and seeing where that goes. And so I asked my dear friend Kathy Bibby if she would familiarize herself with my Facebook post and a little bit about Jordan Peterson, and she was gracious enough to volunteer to do that and to interview me and kind of draw me out here. So I hope it'll be really valuable for you. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Bibby. I'll be in Kathy's hands till the end of the show, and then she'll turn it back over to me and we'll close it out. So without further ado, here's my dear friend Kathy Bibby.
Well, thank you, David, and I really appreciate you asking me to do this. I feel a little bit a fish out of water in terms of, I have fairly recent knowledge of Dennis Prager's work. I'm reading his book. To refresh my memory, the name of Dennis Prager's book is...
It's a book about the importance of understanding what makes America distinct and
right.
What types of boundaries are needed in terms of honoring that distinction and exploring that possibility.
And so I have his book is very intriguing to me because I'm going to call it reforming lefty. And he has definite views on what the left ideology brings to the plate. And it's been really eye-opening for me. And I'm not very familiar with the work of Jordan Peterson, so I did listen to the interview with he and Dennis Prager, which was quite eye-opening. And it brought more light to the statement that David posted on Facebook. And I have some definite, some questions around that as well. I've been a student of David's for many years, about 12, I think now. And so I really understand his work around transformation. And I think it might be handy if I read what you posted. Do you think that's a good way to go at this
Yeah,
point?
what I'd like you to do is read the whole thing, and then let's take it paragraph by paragraph. I'll say what I want to say about that paragraph, and then if you have any questions about that paragraph, and then we'll just work our way through the post, trying to bring that post to life for people in a powerful way.
Okay, there's some really juicy stuff here. So I'm going to read it here, paragraph by paragraph. So David states in the Facebook post, I've been carefully studying the work of Jordan Peterson. I immediately had mixed feelings about his work, and I have been meditating on what that's all about. I now have clarity about it. What I love about his work is his clarity about the evil of postmodern moral relativism and his challenge for us to be the best version of ourselves in spite of all the challenges of being in this world. So,
keep going.
Okay. Where I think he leads people astray is when he, I need my glasses. Hold on one second. Where I think he leads people astray is when he extrapolates and enters into the realm of philosophy. His basic philosophical view is that life is suffering. My basic philosophy is that life is love in action. You want to say anything to this?
No, keep going. We're going to read it all the way through, and then we're going to go back paragraph by paragraph.
Okay, great. He confuses ego-based consciousness with real life. This is understandable since most people in the world are locked into ego-based consciousness. His view seems to be that instinctual nature of man must be overcome in a Freudian type of way. This creates an eternal tension within the person, which is what I immediately and regularly sense from Jordan. His view is to integrate the instinctual energies into the larger context.
No, not his view. Not his view.
My view is to integrate the instinctual energies into the larger context of the full infinite nature of the human being and to transmute those energies in service to the one.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. I don't think there's anything that needs to be said about the first two paragraphs, but for completion, let's read it again and we'll roll right in to the third paragraph.
Okay, so I've been carefully studying the work of Jordan Peterson. I immediately had mixed feelings about his work, and I've been meditating on what that's all about. I now have clarity about it. What I love about his work is his clarity about the evil of postmodern moral relativism and his challenge for us to be the best version of ourselves in spite of all the challenges of being in the world, this world.
So let's talk about that. Let's unpack that third paragraph. So if you could read the first sentence of the third paragraph, we'll start to unpack it, and then feel free to interrupt me at any time.
Okay. What I love about his work is his clarity about the evil of postmodern moral relativism.
Okay, let's stop right there. Okay, so postmodern moral relativism is basically the idea that everything is simply a point of view, and that since points of view are subjective, all points of view are equally valid. This is actually one of the four basic tenets of the Church of Satan. And I consider it to be one of the most dangerous philosophies ever, and especially in our world today. And one of the things that makes it so dangerous is that most people are under the spell of this postmodern moral relativism without ever having even realized that they've chosen that as their philosophical view. So if you take that view to the extreme, it becomes absurd. For example, if all points of view are equally valid, how would you differentiate between confusion and clarity? How would you differentiate between a truth and a fact and a non-fact? There would be no such thing as wisdom. There would be no such thing as enlightenment. There would be no such thing as getting clear on something. There would be no such thing as being truly confused. And of course, this viewpoint can be used to justify anything. If anything is as valid as anything else, and there's no objective standard where we can evaluate ourselves relative to something outside of our opinion, we're only left with our opinion. And that kind of throws truth out the window. It throws out any possibility of the sacred out the window. It abdicates the responsibility of testing your philosophy in relation to reality, your physical circumstances of reality, to see if your philosophy is viable in terms of improving the quality of life, because there's no standard. Everything is relative. Everything is just an opinion. And so you don't have really any basis for debate or for learning or for growth. And so he's very critical of that, as am I. And especially when he's speaking to young people that are looking for something that's real, this helps the young person to realize that maybe they've been steeped in this postmodern relativism in their educational training without even knowing it. And the fact that it points to the possibility of something objective and more real and substantial is very comforting and helpful to many people, especially young people. And so I have a lot of affinity for his viewpoint about the dangers of postmodern moral relativism. So that was an area where I felt really good about what he was saying. So go ahead and continue with that third paragraph.
Okay. Well, and his challenges in relation to his view on postmodern relativism, and his challenge is for us to be the best version of ourselves in spite of all the challenges of being in this world.
And that's another area where I had a lot of affinity with him and his ideas, in the sense that what I've discovered on my own path of living and my spiritual path and guiding thousands of other people to higher levels of wellness and greater spiritual realization is that one of the necessary conditions to fuel that journey is a commitment to do the best you can in every moment, to really attempt to bring out the best in yourself in every moment, knowing that it's a work in progress, and to also parenthetically be committed to bringing out the best in other people and bringing out the best in situations. But of course, even the words we're using now, like words like best, have no meaning in postmodern moral relativism, because then we just get into opinions about what's best. Well, is killing babies best? Or is having babies live best? Well, if it's all a point of view and they're all valid, then we really don't have anything to talk about except just agreeing to disagree. So again, anyway, so I really like that paragraph. That these are things where I felt a resonance with him, and I think he's bringing important ideas to people, especially young people. Anything else you want to say about that third paragraph before we go on to the fourth?
maybe a little bit of clarification. So when you're saying in your post, you say, he's challenging us, that you go along with him in terms of challenging us to be the best version of ourselves in spite of the challenges. So you're saying that to be, to look at ourselves critically and be the best we can be under the circumstances. Is that accurate to say?
Well, you're defining it you're using the same words in the sentence that was in the paragraph.
Okay. By best, you're saying there's to evaluate ourselves in terms of being the best we can be at whatever it is we're doing in this present time. Is that?
Yeah, always do the best you can in every moment. And that
Okay.
best is not completely subjective.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And in relation to moral relativism, you're saying there's no such thing as best. That's what I'm trying to be clear.
Within the philosophy of moral relativism, everything is just an opinion. There is no object. Like is stealing better than not stealing?
Okay. I just kind of wanted to make that distinction a little clearer. Okay. And you go on to say, where I think he leads people astray is when he extrapolates and enters into the realm of philosophy.
Okay. All right.
His basic philosophical view is that life is suffering.
Okay, let's stop right there. So that's not my opinion. He says in his interview with Dennis Prager, he says that is his philosophy. And it's very consistent with sort of the fundamentalist Christian church doctrine of life is suffering, Christ was a martyr, he suffered on the cross, he died for our sins. This world is a world of sin and suffering, and somehow we need to rise above this world that's tainted and sinful and go to some other place that's beyond ourself. And therefore we have to wrestle with certain aspects of ourself that are bad. That's basically that view. And that's not how I see things at all. And yet I can understand how he could jump to that philosophy. And it's a very Freudian view of the world, where there's your conscious sense of self, and then there's your instinctual drives that get you in trouble, and then there's your superconscious, your super ego that is telling you what you should and shouldn't do, and life is kind of a battle among those different forces, and you just have to use your willpower and keep going, and ask God, which you have now determined is outside of you, because you're screwed up and God is great, and hopefully there'll be some salvation there. So that's not my worldview at all.
And so your worldview is life is love in action. Yeah.
Yes, look at a baby being born, look at two people in love, look at a butterfly, look at a sunflower, look at a beautiful sunset, look at the way a mother cares for her children. Look at it's only the it's only the fact that human beings have free will, and that to a large extent, and that most people are what I would say spiritually ignorant and don't know who they are, and they identify with this mechanism called ego, which, if you identify with it and act as it, it will get you in trouble, and it will hurt you, and it will hurt other people. But rather than fight with that mechanism, which is what he's basically suggesting without realizing that that's a mechanism and not a part of you, my approach in my spiritual path and in my teaching for my students is not to fight it, because if you fight it, you're basically saying that it's real, because why else would you put energy into fighting it? And so my approach is to identify it as a mechanism, and to realize that you must not be that mechanism, because if you were that mechanism, you wouldn't be able to see the mechanism. And over time, we learn to become aware of that mechanism, understand what drives it, let it be, take responsibility for our relationship with it, and get to the point where it's not using us, it's not driving us, where we can integrate the best of our we can integrate the power of our instinctual energies, our desire to survive, our sexual impulses, our desire to make a mark in the world, and to put all of those energies in service to unity, to the greater whole, to the wholeness of the whole, to the sacred. And so basically my philosophy of spirituality is based on unity, and his philosophy is based on duality. And my direct experience and my experience with thousands of patients and students shows me over the years that ultimately, if you want to realize what Jesus was teaching, you must get to the point where you realize that the perception of duality and polarity is a limited perception, and that there is no ultimate polarity in reality. And so basically what I think is happening is that Jordan Peterson is, his philosophy, if people buy it hook, line, and sinker, it may help them for a while, but ultimately they're going to plateau out, and they're going to start suffering more in their awareness. And unless they critically evaluate his philosophy and realize that there are other possibilities, his philosophy, because it's fundamentally based in duality, is going to leave people suffering. So let's go back and read that fourth paragraph again.
His basic philosophy view that life is suffering. My basic philosophy is life is love in action. He confuses ego-based consciousness with real life. And this is understandable since most people in the world are locked into ego-based consciousness. His view seems to be that the instinctual nature of man must be overcome in a Freudian type of way. This creates an eternal tension within the person.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there.
Sure.
And you can see the tension in him. Like when you watch him or listen to him, you can see the tension in his body. You can see him wrestling with his emotions. You can see the tension in his voice. He hardly ever smiles. His face is very tense. He's very serious all the time. You can see that he's not a happy camper. And 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 that's important for anybody who's thinking about studying with somebody or following a teacher, to not get hypnotized with their words, but focus on what they're being and focus on their energy.
So I have a question just in terms of what you stated. You said this creates an eternal, is that what you meant to say, eternal tension? Not internal.
As long as the person, it's eternal as long as the person is stuck in that worldview. It'll last, it's part and parcel of that worldview. That worldview is always going to be correlated with a tension, because you're going to feel like there's all these different parts of you, and then one part of you has to fight or tame or control another part of you. So there's always going to be this hypervigilance. There's always going to be this tension.
Got it.
There's always going to be the boogeyman.
You know, maybe I'm a little ignorant on this, but postmodern relativism, at least my experience with being a leftist is, we have to pay attention and be good to all these different aspects of being human, be it being politically correct. Does that make sense? We have to pay attention to all this, so we're always trying to be perfect within that world, trying to be politically correct. I mean, this is what I sense.
Of course, it's not. Of course, it's not even logically consistent, because how can you be correct if there's no morality?
Exactly.
So it's completely crazy making. It doesn't hold together, and ultimately it creates a tremendous tension in the psyche, because it's not a viewpoint that's consistent, and ultimately leads to a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And also there's this denial of evil within the leftist worldview, because it's all a point of view.
Well, that's where I was a little confused by that about him, in terms of
he thinks people are evil.
Right.
He thinks he has a different confusion than the postmodern moral relativists.
Because they think basically everybody's good. And it doesn't make sense. Reality doesn't make sense to them.
Right, and even their view is internally consistent. Because how could there be good and bad if it's all an opinion?
Yeah. Okay.
It's crazy making. It's crazy making. And
well, his is a little crazy making too.
Well, I mean, does he look like a happy camper to you?
No.
Okay.
No. Definitely not a happy camper.
I'm showing you why. I'm showing you the structure behind his misery. And I don't say that to judge him as a person. I say that to point out the limitations of his worldview, and that his worldview is correlated with the inevitability of suffering just as much as the postmodern moral relativism view is correlated with the inevitability of suffering. And with Jordan Peterson, it comes from a fundamental confusion between love and real life on one hand, and the mechanism of the ego and how people show up when they're identified as ego-based consciousness. He doesn't make that distinction And because he doesn't make that distinction, he defaults to the best philosophy that's left for him, which is to try to tame the savage beast inside of him and protect himself against the savage beast of others. And that's inevitable, and that's life, and that therefore life is suffering, and America is the culture with the least amount of suffering. And so we should be grateful that at least we have the least amount of suffering.
Yeah.
And we need to be hyper vigilant to make sure that we don't let go of that, so then we would suffer even more. And so that's his view. And so he ends up showing up the way he shows up that's correlated with that view. He has the thoughts that he has the philosophy he has the body posture he has the voice he has the tension in his body that he has the emotions that he has. And I wanted to talk about it because for two reasons. One, is becoming very influential to a certain body percentage of people, and also he's a great object lesson to point out these incredibly powerful distinctions between, shows you what can happen when you make one little mistake. You know, he makes this one little mistake where he conflates ego-based consciousness with human beings and with life and real life. And from that one confusion, everything else follows. And then from that misperception, he tries to compensate and have the best life he possibly can. And then that leads to the way his life has turned out and the way he thinks and walks and talks and explains things and perceives things. And it just shows how you can take 9 parts of truth and add 1 part of a falsehood, and it damages the whole dish. And
well, as opposed to, okay.
You know, that, you know, it's a little trickier than, it's a little easier to see through the fallacy of postmodern moral relativism than it is to see through the issues with Jordan Peterson.
So is he basically coming from ego-based consciousness in terms of trying to control?
He doesn't know there's anything else. The only thing he doesn't even know that he's doing that. He doesn't know that he's conflated who people are with ego-based expression. So his only way out of that conundrum is to postulate a God that's outside of all these terrible people and all this terrible earthly existence that is suffering.
So God is over there, not part of life.
No, because life is suffering.
Right. Okay, and you don't, yeah.
So,
and you, okay.
So salvation must be outside of you.
Total. Everything's got to be outside of you. Almost everything. Love.
Except for your badness.
Well, we're bad.
Right. Right.
We're basically bad.
Right.
So
Right.
that in itself is judgment. That in itself is the ego. Right? I mean, does that make sense?
He doesn't fall into the same trap as the moral relativists and saying that all viewpoints are equally valid. He doesn't fall into that trap.
Mm.
That's why figuring out his trap is a little trickier.
So his way out
His confusion is more fundamental, is more ontological. That's why it took me a while of hanging out with him to figure it out.
So what is his way out?
There is no way out. You know, his only way out is for him to open up to the possibility that he's conflating real life with ego-based consciousness and the type of expression of existence that shows up when someone is under the spell of ego-based consciousness. He would have to be open to the possibility that there is a spark, that we're children of God. He would have to open up to that possibility as a living reality. But now he can't do it, because if he did that, then logically he'd have to think that God was bad.
So
he's locked in. He's locked into a life of suffering, and he views America as the society that has the least amount of suffering.
Because
we tame the savage beast better than others.
Oh, okay.
And we strive to be something greater than our fucked up self.
What is he advising people, quote, to do?
What I told you at the beginning. What I said in the third paragraph that I liked about him. He encourages people to have some type of objective sense of ethics and morals and values. And he encourages people to try to be their best. But see, there's a logical fallacy in being the best, right? Because you almost have to transcend yourself in his worldview to be your best. You have to transcend your evil self in order to be your best.
And so what?
So you've got to be constantly fighting yourself. So you can transcend yourself and be better.
And so what is your stand around transformation? How does that?
I already said it.
Okay.
I'll say it again.
Okay, say it again.
I'll say it again. That rather than conflate who people are with ego-based expression, to make that distinction and to become aware of the ego mechanism, how it operates, what it's up to, become aware of it, realize that you must not be it if you're able to be aware of it, allow it to be there, take responsibility for your relationship to that mechanism, forgive yourself, forgive others, give other people permission to forgive you, be grateful for seeing it, and then choose to live as your best sense of your authentic self that is not ego-based, and to stand for the possibility of being able to live from that place and live that way and have a powerful place to stand in relation to the challenges that emerge from the inertia of ego activity and your attachment to it, plus the fact that we live in a society that's an expression and reflection of primarily ego-based consciousness, is how do you negotiate that world without going into judgment yourself? So that gets into topics that are way beyond the scope of this conversation, which is designed to do a powerful critique of Jordan Peterson's philosophy and worldview. And again, I want to say the reason that I'm doing this critique is not because I have any interest in judging Jordan Peterson as a person. I'm doing it because now that he's in a position of being an influencer, a teacher, a mentor for people who haven't necessarily been taught how to think critically, or don't have the depth and breadth of knowledge and wisdom that I might have accumulated by this point. I think it's important to put this on the record so that people can consider the ideas here, so that they can take the best of Jordan Peterson's philosophy without buying it hook, line, and sinker. And at the same time, really appreciate what he does have to offer. And what I'd like to do before we close it out is, you're sort of the representative of the audience. And so if you could talk very candidly about your experience of this conversation and where you are now in relation to Jordan Peterson's work compared to where you were before the conversation, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, I'll give it my best shot.
Please do. How are you doing? How is this conversation for you? How would you characterize your relationship to Jordan Peterson's perspective now compared to before the conversation?
Well, I too see the value of what he's putting out there. And I'm more clear on the stumbling block, and that has to do with the suffering piece. People are, humans are basically evil, and that, we just have to buck up and do the best we can to make the most of life. And having been a student of yours for such a long time now, I mean, I've been addicted to suffering. That's been my MO. That's how I was thrown into the world. That's how I lived my life, not even knowing it, not being conscious of it until my path crossed yours. And I still continued to be addicted to that suffering. And it wasn't until recently when I discovered that through the realization that, going through what you defined as becoming aware that I was addicted to this suffering, and getting to a point where I just accepted it. I didn't have to fight it. I was fighting it for a long time, trying to overcome it, the overcome mechanism. And when I finally accepted that that's where I was coming from, suddenly it began to lose a lot of its power. And then I, like you said, really had to look at it and be with it in such a way to realize the costs and payoffs of having that point of view, and then moving into really learning. And this has taken me a long time. I'm not one to easily forgive or to forgive others or myself, but forgiveness is powerful. It's a powerful tool that maybe he hasn't gotten to, that key point of forgiveness, because it unleashes a possibility that
I don't see how it's possible for him to have gotten to true forgiveness.
I don't either.
I don't see how that's possible.
He never used the term, and he didn't go into that whatsoever, or grace forgiveness. But that's like such a key tenet of Christ consciousness in your teachings. To me, that's a key tenet, because it liberates you. It liberates from you all, from all your whatever you want, whatever you're trying to deal with. And
I want to say something. I want to say, so the viewer and listener is clear, I'm not saying there is no suffering. I'm saying that ego-based consciousness is correlated with suffering. Where I disagree with Jordan Peterson is that life is suffering.
Yeah, so from your, I mean, um, the forgiveness piece has been tremendous for me and helped liberate my, I want to call it an attachment to um, suffering. I might still suffer, but my attachment to being that is not there as much. And I'm more reliant on um, my own sense of my being rather than looking out there for what I should do, how I should be, where I should go, all that. I'm
So
more reliant on.
you've talked a lot the last 5 minutes about your own journey and your own process. Do you want to relate it back to the topic of this conversation and evaluating Jordan Peterson's philosophy?
Well, that's what I was attempting to do with my own story.
But go ahead and connect the dots for us.
What do you
see with Jordan Peterson's philosophy now?
Basically, he's, people are evil, or people are evil. I mean, that's what I sense from him. And that I don't believe people are evil. People are just people, and they have illusions. And they have a lot of confusion and illusions. That doesn't mean they're evil. People can do evil deeds. People can do good deeds. What does that make them? It makes them people. It makes life life. And so through my own journey, I looked deep into those illusions and discovered the illusions of them. But that doesn't make me bad. For a long time, I was judging my own illusions. Oh, I'm bad for thinking that, or I'm bad for thinking. But, you can transform the illusion. You don't have to be within that. So I see where that aspect, the suffering, you don't have to suffer. It's just a difference in the way you relate to things. It's not that you're evil. Does that make sense now? Does that connect the dots?
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to make whatever connections you wanted to make between the distinctions I was making and your journey.
Okay. Well, basically, he's saying there's no way out except to face the music and realize what the music is trying to tell you and do the best you can. But
well, what is he saying? What is he saying the music is?
That we're evil, and that we have to buck up and overcome that.
Right. Yeah. So again, in my languaging, where he gets himself into trouble is he doesn't make a distinction between real life and ego-based consciousness. And once he conflates those two things, his philosophy is basically derived as an attempt to compensate as best you can given that conclusion, and to attempt to avoid the domination of human nature as much as possible. And then to, from that place, to ask a God outside of you to help you. That's not a very exciting worldview for me. That's not a worldview that would get me up in the morning, inspired. That's not a worldview that would allow me to be psychologically and physically relaxed. That's not a worldview that would allow me to have a committed sense of purpose and at the same time have a sense of humor It wouldn't be a worldview that would allow me to make a distinction between judgment and discernment. It's sort of a tragic worldview, you know, and I see him a little bit as a tragic figure because he's if you listen to his words, he's attempting to promote freedom, but he to me seems all locked up. I think he's wanting his own freedom, but there's no logical room for him to have his own freedom given his misperception. And I think that's why he has so much tension. And so
without the recognition of,
I hope this is helpful. I hope this is really, really helpful. And God bless Jordan Peterson. And I am glad he's in the world. And I'd rather have him in the world than not in the world. And he has goodness in his heart, even though he might not want to admit it. And I think therein lies the rub.
I remember in the interview he did with Dennis Prager, he was amazed at the good things that came his way.
Well, he was just amazed that you could sit in an auditorium without there being a riot.
Yeah, yeah. He was amazed.
And that says it all right there.
Yeah. And he had gratitude for that, and he offered that as a component. Right,
but that's such a low bar. That's like saying I'm grateful that my parents aren't knocking the shit out of me.
True. So it's a little bit of a, wow, wouldn't it be great? I mean, since I've dislocated my ego-based consciousness to the point of being more in alignment with my infinite being, you know, I can confidently say I am God. I mean, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way. It's just that I'm more integrated with that consciousness.
With
and
that unity.
That's the beauty. Yeah.
Your realization of unity is expanding. But he's locked himself into a worldview where there's no possibility for the realization of unity. So he defaults to what he considers to be the best option available to him.
When the unity is actually there, but he can't see it for what it is.
He cannot see it.
He has no faith.
No, he cannot see it.
So, yeah.
And
but I appreciate what he's doing as well. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
It's amazing to me after working with thousands of people to see how just one or two fundamental misperceptions can shape a life and be correlated with so much suffering on every level. And so I want to dedicate this conversation to Jordan Peterson. And
bless him.
And that may I hold a possibility for him that he's not in touch with right now, as many, many beings have done for me along my journey. So this is Dr. David Kamnitzer, and you've been listening to a special edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. Here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. This has been one of those turnaround shows where my friend Kathy Bibby was interviewing me as I had the opportunity to share some of my ideas about Jordan Peterson's work in philosophy and what are some of the useful things and what are some of the pitfalls and traps, and to hopefully help people to radically penetrate what I see as the fundamental misperception in Jordan's life and Jordan's work. And I want to dedicate this to Jordan Peterson, and may he someday know the peace that passeth all understanding. And with that, we'll close with love and peace. Bye for now, and thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.